Thank you so much for joining us today, Angela.
It is my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I am very honored that you've come on to discuss LGBTQIA2 spirit issues with us. And there's two general categories that we're going to be covering today. I'd love to at first hear about some of the specific issues facing that community involving psychedelics and psychedelic ceremonies. And then I would love to hear how psychedelics can actually be healing for some of the specific traumas that the LGBTQIA2 spirit community has encountered along their journey. So, Angela, if you could start by telling us a little bit about some of the LGBTQIA2 spirit specific issues in psychedelic ceremony, some ways in which ceremonies have perhaps not been so inclusive, and maybe some changes that you see that could be made.
Of course, yes. So I think, I mean, the legal way that people are involved in psychedelic medicine right now is through research. And so that is where we're seeing all of the major changes that are happening in the culture right now above ground. There's lots happening underground for sure. And all of that will come to light more and more as legalization in multiple states moves forward. But as far as what has been impactful in the research around psychedelic therapy is, well, for starters, having representation in the facilitators. I think that there is a growing group of people who are a part of the LGBTQIA2 spirit community, but there for a long time was not a lot of representation in psychedelic medicine around the queer and trans community. So for people who are receiving psychedelics in a research setting, it can be with any situation when you are sitting with someone that you need to have trust and rapport with. It is easier to have that rapport, that trust, if that person is from your community, understands who you are, recognizes your culture and your community. And so I think it's been difficult to access a lot of the different pieces of queer and trans culture for people in research because, well, for starters, there's just not a lot of folks in research. There are some folks that I'm really excited about in the research community doing queer and trans specific research. Um, I've had the privilege to meet a couple of folks, and I'll just give you some brief information about them. There's in Portland, there's Dr. Chris Stouffer, at MD at OHSU doing research. And I kind of have a professional crush on them. Um, I just love their work. I love what they're doing. I love how they are directly focusing on the queer and trans community and the issues that arise. Um, a study that they're working on right now, I believe, is psilocybin for demoralization in folks who are long-term survivors of AIDS and HIV. So, you know, the work is not only addressing directly the issues of our community, but it also encompasses a lot of group work and emphasizes the importance of community in the healing process. Um, there's also Dr. Jay Savalius at UCSF, who has done a significant amount of psychedelic research, I think mostly around MDMA uh, treatment, and is works also as a researcher in queer and trans focused health issues. Uh, a lot of work around resilience and protective factors in life and community that help support and prevent trauma, depression, anxiety from occurring. And then there's Alexander Belzer, who is a PhD researcher, uh, I think a psychologist at Yale, who has done an extensive amount of research work around PTSD and MDMA and psilocybin and cancer, end of life anxiety. So those are just some highlights of some of the researchers and community who are doing the work that needs to be done. I think one of the issues has been that there's a lack of focus around queer and trans community. Um, the studies have been more generalized, and it's really lovely to see these folks working on specific issues for the community, diving into the details of what our needs are. I'm really excited about an upcoming study that will be happening in Portland, uh, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for people in the queer and trans community who experience trauma and PTSD. That's going to be starting, I believe, next year. So we're a few years out from that. But there's more and more in the research coming forth. It's wonderful. Um, for a good while, uh, the psychedelic research has been done in pairs, in dyads, two facilitators for one recipient. And for a while, that dyad pair was designated one male, one female. And that carries some issues for the LGBTQIA2 spirit community. One, there's no one in that dyad that may represent people who are genderqueer or non-binary or agender. And again, like I said earlier, that reflection of your lived experience and your community can be really important in building rapport. Um, and a male-female dyad doesn't allow room for facilitators who are non-binary. Um, and so there has been movement definitely to make a change in that form of work, that form of research, and less emphasis on the gender specifics of the person in the role, more emphasis on their ability to provide supportive care to the recipient. Um, there's a lot of talk in psychedelic community of oneness, of finding that oneness, finding that fusion of everything. And there's been some interesting discussion around how oneness and unity is wonderful, but not necessarily um, a part of everyone's experience. Not everybody has a mystical experience of being one with everything. And there's been discussion of that specific to the LGBTQIA community, um, unification and loss of one's identity, one's individual experiences is not something that happens to everyone. Certainly, some people in the community do experience that. But for some people, that idea of melding, of becoming one and losing all of those unique pieces of themselves doesn't fit their paradigm of a spiritual connecting experience. So I think, the mystical experiences questionnaire may not, for instance, find that they had a mystical experience, but they still have had a mystical experience. It's just a different kind of mystical experience. It's 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 a recognition, perhaps, of the beauty of the diversity of the world and how one person may fit into that beauty and diversity, but not an absolute dissolution of identity and self.
That makes total sense. I hadn't considered that aspect. So thank you for bringing that up. And also thank you
Mhm.
for bringing up Alexander Belser because I
Mhm.
had he had specifically brought up at some point reference to the fact that the members of the LGBTQIA2 spirit community may feel uncomfortable in perhaps something like an ayahuasca ceremony or something that has more of an indigenous background because of strong patriarchal or stereotypical gender roles that tend to be perpetuated in those ceremonies. Could you speak a little bit to that, please?
I can. I've not personally ever sat for a traditional ayahuasca ceremony, so I have not experienced what that is. Um, but again, the idea of a dyad, the idea of duality of male female, doesn't fit within a lot of the queer and trans paradigm. It's um, you know, a non-binary person does not fit into that duality. a trans person who, may flow, genderqueer person who flows back and forth and up and down and in and out may not feel comfortable being separated into a group of men and a group of women. Um, I have a friend who had a sit and did not feel comfortable. This person is non-binary and didn't feel comfortable sitting with the women, didn't feel comfortable sitting with the men, didn't really have a place that they could be. And I believe finally they decided to sit with the women, but dress in the way that they felt the most comfortable for the ceremony. So it can be, and when you go into a ceremony, you don't want all of that detail to come up and hit you in the face while you're trying to process complex trauma. You just want to go sit down, feel held, feel contained, and given space to be who you are. And that's very prohibitive to have to, try and make yourself fit into a box that does not contain you appropriately while you're undergoing a tremendous journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I can completely empathize with the fact that that must seem to, be almost a re-traumatization right as you're going into something that is hopefully going to help you address your past traumas.
Hmm. Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah, and I really appreciate you bringing up these different aspects that perhaps people haven't considered before. If you are feel as though you're one gendered, it may never arise to you like, oh, what if somebody doesn't feel comfortable sitting in this we've completely binary setup that we've made. And so, thank you for helping bringing these issues to people who perhaps are, if we have any facilitators listening, perhaps they can be more cognizant to those people. Because ceremonies, even non-indigenous, perhaps there's some reason that they've chosen to set themselves up in a binary way here outside of the indigenous setup, and that's something that we can now help people take into consideration, is that that doesn't always fit for people and maybe re-traumatizing. And that leads me to the question that I was going to ask about. I have seen different ceremony facilitation retreat centers offer LGBTQIA to spirit specific ceremonies. And now that helps me understand. I mean, at first I thought it was just like you said, helpful that the facilitator is from your community. But do you think that's another reason that those types of ceremonies have been offered?
I do, and I'm very grateful that there are more and more people recognizing and offering sits for our community. Um, I would say that although it is a lovely idea to offer, it is also important to do the research and do the work to understand the nuances of the community. So if you are a person who is not from community, it's still a wonderful option to provide that service, but make sure that you understand the details of pronouns and um, the fact that different people have different gender expressions and the fact that different people are going to have different things come up in relation to their gender, relation to their sexuality, and they'll need to have a safe container to discuss that in. So I think a lot of preparation work is necessary for facilitating that kind of sit well for our community.
Is there a movement to increase the number of LGBTQIA to spirit therapists so that those types of sits can have somebody from the community there to facilitate when you said like those specific issues come up?
I would be personally delighted to know that there is. I don't know for sure. I think, well, we have a lot of training programs already up and running. There's MAPS, there's the California Institute for Integral Studies, there's Synthesis, there's Compass. So there are a number of big training programs out there. But the ones that I am the most excited about are the little ones that are just popping up now here and there. For instance, Fruiting Bodies Collective here in Oregon is working on putting together a training program that really centers and focuses on the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, LGBTQIA communities, immigrant communities. So they're building a program that really focuses on serving marginalized communities, centering marginalized communities, and and reinvesting in community as well. Like their goal is to make sure that community is supported by the work that they do. And they're really coming from a healing justice framework, and I just really appreciate their work. Um, that's Rebecca Martinez and Alon Higgins here in Portland doing lovely work.
Nice. We will put a link to their website and their resources in the show notes. So thank you for bringing that up. I have seen them on
Hmm.
Instagram, and I love to hear that that is what they're doing. And I think, 'cause, we've seen, like you said, with other marginalized communities, perhaps there have been scholarships to help those therapists. And so I would love to see that there are likewise scholarships to help members of the LGBTQIA2 spirit community, so that, like you said, that when a ceremony is held, that there is somebody qualified from the community to address those specific issues. And now on the, post ceremony side, would you mind talking a little bit about the benefit of having LGBTQIA2 spirit specific integration circles?
Yes, of course. I have been to at least one specific to our community. Um, and really, again, just appreciated having the opportunity to process my experiences with people from my community, people who I don't have to explain in detail to what genderqueer means. I can just sit down and say, this is what happened, and this is how it went, and have them work with me from that cultural context to understand and integrate the experiences that have been had. Um, there are a few around the country, not very many yet. I'm very hopeful that we'll get more and more picking up as, again, legalization rolls out. But it's precious that centering of our community to be able to sit with people who just understand.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Like not having to sit down and explain who you are, but just to get to start from the fact everybody knows who I am and accepts, and we can move forward with. And I think also, as we'll talk about in the next section, perhaps even having a common shared experience of certain types of trauma. I think,
Hmm.
when you speak about what came up in your ceremony, it's a trauma that other people probably have a more close, in-depth understanding of when you're sharing.
Yes, exactly.
Well, if we could talk about now a little bit, like you said, that I think you said in Portland, they're going to be doing some research on psychedelics and healing LGBTQIA2 spirit specific trauma. Can you talk a little bit about perhaps what has been done or what is known in that area and how psychedelics can be healing to your community?
There is a great body of research that is building at this point. We've been So really psychedelic research started in the 50s and the 60s, kind of went on hiatus through the 70s, 80s, 90s because of prohibition, and then came back online in the early 2000s and so on forth. And um, there's a great deal of knowledge around the use of MDMA and for PTSD at this point, um, and psilocybin for depression, um, for end of life anxiety, um, for there's so much for obsessive compulsive disorder, for anxiety related to autism spectrum experiences, for we're looking at psilocybin for more physical issues like for chronic pain. There's an article that came out relatively recently on the potential use of psilocybin for autoimmune disorders and inflammation. I'm very excited about that. But um, the queer and trans community, because of historical and current marginalization and stigma, carries a very heavy weight of mental health issues. People who are rejected by their families, by their communities, by their spiritual communities, uh, fired from their job because of who they are, losing housing because of who they are, inability to find work because of who they are. Uh, Trauma tends to build up. Chronic and intense PTSD can result from a lifetime of stigma. And that can lead to depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation and a lot of other conditions. And that burden has been a heavy weight for me. I've been a primary care provider for the last 10 years to the queer and trans community. Specifically, I worked at the Equi Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that I founded in a clinic for queer and trans community, doing primary care, doing hormone therapy, doing sexual health care. And the burden of pain is amazing. So many people struggle so much with not only their own internal pain that they're carrying from cultural, social rejection, but also the lack of resources, the lack, the poverty and disability due to a lack of being able to access what is needed is huge. And for many years, I've really struggled with, okay, well, how? How do I serve my community? How do I support people experiencing trauma? These meds are not working. These therapy modalities are not working. Even EMDR, the recovery rate is not great. But then you look at things like psilocybin and MDMA, and the opportunity for healing is so immense. I think the most recent study that MAPS put out, it was a 68% recovery rate from PTSD. That is enormous. It makes me want to cry just thinking about it, that there are so many people in my, who have been in my care who will now have access to something that is actually healing, that can actually not only heal them personally, but can do healing work for the whole community. The community carry, not it's not just the individuals, but the whole community carries this trauma. And I'm just so excited about the possibilities for healing. Addiction is another aspect of trauma. People who are trying to cope with that much pain, there aren't a lot of great tools. And addiction is a form of coping. It is the way that people can tolerate what their experience is. And what is it? The opposite of addiction is connection. I Psychedelics offer the opportunity for connection of the self to something greater, something outside, a bigger community, spirituality, and really does a huge amount to heal um, people's relationships with substances. I've found a lot of conversations I've had in my capacity as a primary care doctor, in my capacity as a peer support and medic at Burning Man, and at Queer Dome, which is a psychedelic support tent at Camp Comfort and Joy and Burning Man, and then also on Fireside Project, which is a psychedelic support line. All of my experiences talking to people have been, it's just remarkable how my relationship with substances changed once I felt more connected and, you know, had more personal agency, felt I had more personal agency to choose the direction I wanted my life to go. So that's another, I think, wonderful piece of healing that can occur. Um, I'll stop there.
Well,
I
I
could,
appreciate you bringing up those two aspects because one is the medicines themselves. And like you said, MDMA is that 68%. Like you said it, I got chills. I mean, I've read the whole thing many times and I still get chills every time that I think about
mhm,
an actual
yes,
cure for something. Like, just so grateful for all the work that's been done in that realm. And then
indeed.
you also mentioned that just being in the psychedelic community and being in the peer support community has added some healing because exactly what you said, if addiction or disconnection is a big issue that comes from especially something that like you said has been constantly stigmatized, then having that community of people in and of itself can be a type of healing. So
Yes.
and that is like you said a thing that the psychedelic community offers a lot of opportunity for should you take it. Like thank you for shouting out the Fireside Project. We're close
Hmm.
friends of the show. We love what you, are you a volunteer with the Fireside Project? That's amazing.
Yes, I am a supervisor.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, thank
It's
you
been
for
wonderful.
the work you do there. Yeah. Well, how has that been? How has that been going? I'd love to hear an inside. We interviewed them here on the podcast before they had launched. So, how has it been in the past month or two since launch?
We've been on for I think a little over 2 months now. I supervise on Saturday nights, and it's been really delightful. It's my heart work to sit with people in transformational spaces, whatever that transformation might be, whatever substance might be involved. You know, it's beautiful to sit with people while they go through revelations and come into themselves and settle into their who they are. And I adore doing the work. Um, I've had the opportunity to talk to a number of people having difficult psychedelic experiences, and they I'm there to hold a space. I'm a container for them to explore what and who they are and what their needs are. And it's just beautiful to see people with such a heightened ability to do deep diving into the things that trouble them so much during default world while on psychedelics. It's years of work distilled into one short period of time. And I'm not doing anything. It's them doing all the work. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful to see that ability to transform so quickly.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm so glad to hear that Fireside is going well. And I wanted to one last thing that I know you're also involved in is the Oregon psilocybin rollout of medicinal
Yes.
psilocybin, correct? And
Hmm.
it struck me as you were talking about the different types of trauma that the LGBTQIA2 spirit community has undergone. One of them is poverty. From, like you said,
Yes.
not maybe perhaps not being able to even find employment. And I think, part of what I'm assuming that the Oregon initiative is addressing is that finding a way to get psilocybin specifically to people in different methodologies, perhaps in ways that they can afford. I'm not quite sure how the medical model is going to look, but could you talk a little bit about how how you think that that's going to be taking shape, and perhaps how that can address some of those needs of the community as well?
Yes, I think poverty is a big piece of marginalization across the board, whether we're talking about LGBTQIA2 spirit folks or Black and Indigenous people of color or people with disabilities, uh, not having a sustainable income or not having intergenerational wealth is a big issue. And as we move into the rollout of the legalization of psilocybin, I really want to make sure that on both sides of the ticket, both the people receiving the psilocybin and the facilitators and the growers and the manufacturers all have accessible points, many accessible points for people who are marginalized and don't have a lot of financial ability to, say, start a service center or start a cultivation center where they're growing mushrooms. So Dr. Rachel Knox and I are both on the equity subcommittee of the Psilocybin Advisory Board. And she and I have put together a group of people to advise us and advise the board on equity points around, how do we get scholarships for facilitators, for growers to learn the process so that they can bring their knowledge, expertise, and lived experience to recipients who maybe share some of the same cultural background so that the recipients in this state who are Black and Indigenous people of color, who are LGBTQIA, have someone that some choices around who they see, and it's not just like one single Black facilitator for the whole state, which is a possibility depending on the direction things go. So we're working on the language of the law. We're working on a lot of different aspects. We're working on scholarships. We're working on finding ways to fast track people in marginalized communities. We have a lot of things to consider and a lot of work to do we are in the beginning, I will say, of the process. We've only really been meeting since April. So we're in a scurry in the beginning to get things done, but we're trying to do it the right way as much as possible. There are some points of the law that are already written, um, specifically around people with felonies that I believe personally are prohibitive to equity. And changing those laws may take some time. We may have to go to the legislature to do that. But it is my personal goal to make sure that anyone who is a representative of marginalized communities has the best possible access. You know, marginalized communities have been really impacted largely by the war on drugs, which has put millions of people in jail for drug offenses that and stolen their ability to make income, stolen their ability to connect to community. And we really need to heal that as a part of this work. I see the psilocybin rollout in Oregon as a way to begin the mending process, to begin the restitution and the reparation process. And I really I'm very hopeful that we're going to have a good impact on what the board considers.
Wow. Well, you've just given me a lot of hope as well. I'm so grateful for all the work that you're doing across the board with Oregon, with Fireside, and with your own patients in your own practice, and with sharing the information that you've shared with us today. Just a massive kudos to you, and so much gratitude. And I would love if you could share uh, anything that you want people to go check out. It can be your own work, it can be Fruiting Bodies, whatever you would like people to send people to for more information. The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, yes, you mentioned Fruiting Bodies. I think they're a marvelous place to start. They have a wonderful podcast that they do as well. I think that the Chacruna Queering Psychedelics Conference, which is recorded and available online at the Chacruna website, is a wonderful opportunity to learn a huge amount about psychedelics and the queer community. Um, it's a 2-day conference that happened in 2019, and it's all, like I said, it's all recorded. There's actually an upcoming uh, queering psychedelics reunion of a sort that Chacruna will be putting on in the next few weeks. So check that out too. Um, I mentioned Queer Dome earlier. It is the psychedelic support tent at Burning Man for the LGBTQIA2 spirit community. It was founded by Jared Stanley, Ariel Vigosin, and Max Kapakin in, I believe 2019 was our initial year. But we will be going out again to the dust in the future when Burning Man returns. So we're on Facebook. I believe that's our main source of information. Check us out there. And goodness, what else? The Portland Psychedelic Society has a uh, queer and trans focused integration circle that is a lovely place. Anyone can show up. You don't have to be based in Portland. It's on the Zooms. So come join us and help us integrate and integrate yourself.
I love that. Join Angela in the dust. Join Angela in the Zooms. There's places to find, go out and participate with your community in whatever way calls to you. Thank you so much, Angela. I truly appreciate your time and all
Thank
of your
you.
efforts in this. And for everybody else out there, until next time.